Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And can I start by thanking colleagues of Gedling Council for allowing us to use these beautiful premises this morning. Welcome, everyone. And can I just point out that if you want to ask a question, please use the red button on your speaker. Otherwise, it's difficult for people to hear. We're here this morning to hold the confirmation hearing for the appointment of Chief Finance Officer to the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda and their notes, and if everyone's got everything ready, I'll start by asking for apologies for absence.
Thank you. For this morning's meeting, we've had apologies from Councillors Camilleri and Introna from Nottinghamshire County Council, and Councillors Khan and Woodings from Nottingham City Council. We are expecting Councillor Edwards to attend, so he may be joining us later as their substitute.
Thank you very much. Item 2 of the agenda is declaration of interests by members and officers. Can I start first asking if there are any disclosable pecuniary interests to declare? I don't see anyone. Thank you very much. And can I ask if there are any private interests, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary, which people would like to declare? No? Thank you. In that case then, can I welcome, I have welcomed her already, but just welcome the candidate that you'll hear about in due course, Gillian Holder. And as you'll see at item 4 of the agenda, when we get to it, when we've heard from the Commissioner and the candidate and asked all our questions, I will be reading out the exclusion notice, which describes why we then have to go into private session to discuss the merits of the candidate. And I'll follow that format. Thank you. If we can then hand over then, please, to the Commissioner and welcome the Commissioner and the Chief Executive of the Commissioner's Office to present the report to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair, and lovely to see you all today on this glorious spring day. This report requests that the panel consideration of Gillian Holder as the new CFO for my office as Police and Crime Commissioner in Nottinghamshire. If I just take you briefly through the report, with reference to Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act of 2011, firstly, Schedule 1.6, that I appoint a person to be responsible for the proper administration of my financial affairs. Secondly, 1.7, there cannot be a vacancy in my office as CFO. And Schedule 1.9, which is to notify members of the Police and Crime Panel and seek your thoughts on the appointment of this senior appointment of CFO. So the name of the person I'm proposing for this appointment is Gillian Holder. And if I just give you a little bit of background, I know we've been through this all together already, but as you're aware, my previous CFO, Charlie Radford, left before Christmas, and on the 22nd of December, we approached Craig Guilford with the ask if we could borrow Mark Kimberley to support us as CFO for our office as well. I'm very grateful to Mark Kimberley to be the interim CFO for the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, and thank you to Craig Guilford for supporting that. As in line with SIT for guidance, I've been very clear that I've always had a preference to have a dedicated CFO for the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office in Nottinghamshire rather than a shared one. And in line with the SIT for guidance, we were very clear that we had a joint Chief Finance Protocol referencing the Police Protocol Order of 2011 to make sure there was a clear dividing line when Mark Kimberley was working for both. So with my preference to have a dedicated CFO, I enlisted the help of a public sector recruitment team to help with overseeing the recruitment process of a dedicated CFO for our office. I should note it's a really specialised role, a CFO in policing, and because of this, we needed to do a really specific campaign. We advertised, went out first on the 14th of February for 3-4 weeks. And you can see that we, as well as it being advertised on the website and different partners and associations, we also did an active headhunting campaign, because I was really keen that we had somebody who had the appropriate qualification and also that experience, specifically with policing in public sector. I was delighted that we had 9 really strong candidates, and we shortlisted 5 of them based on their quality and suitability. The shortlisted candidates were invited to an interview on the 22nd of March, and the interview panel comprised of myself, my CEO Sharon Cadell, and Gary Ridley, who is the he works as the ACO in Durham Constabulary, got a fantastic reputation and understands finance, so could ask lots of tricky finance questions. We gave our candidates a really good grilling. It was really important that we had confidence of their quality and suitability. We asked questions on governance, management of police finances, asked typical areas that what CFO would have knowledge of. Also, that strategic leadership in the OPCC was really important. We asked about victims commissioning and partnership working. I have to say, Mrs. Holder was outstanding in the interview. Not only did she give really good answers, she gave fantastic examples where she personally made a difference in the work that she'd done. She's got tremendous experience in working for both the PCC, for working for the police, and also years of public sector experience. And also, following the interview, we have had outstanding references for Gillian. So, thank you very much, Chair. It is my pleasure to recommend to the panel that Mrs. Gillian Holder is appointed the CFO within my office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. As you would expect, we have a number of questions to put to you first, and then some questions to put to your proposed candidate. If we could ask Councillor McRae first, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I was going to say, please set out the reasons Mrs. Holder was the preferred candidate. I think you've kind of answered a lot of that in what you've just said anyway, so it's another chance for you just to, if you've got some bits you'd like to add.
It's a real blessing to have the skills in working both for a police office. She was currently, Mrs. Holder is the Deputy Chief Finance Officer for Lincolnshire Police and also for the PCC. Now that's really helpful for me because she understands the policing finance and the PCC finance. And genuinely, during the interview, which was a real tough interview, every answer she gave, I was dribbling with that excitement. One particular one excited me when Gillian was talking about how she'd personally developed a project on priority budget setting within the police force. And that's something I'd love to bring those skills across to Nottinghamshire. So it was a clear, outstanding candidate for me.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question, Commissioner? You whistle-stop through all the processes. One that interested me was who sat on the stakeholder panel and how did that process work and the views fed into your formal panel hearing?
I know Nicola sat on it. Do you mind if I pass across to my CEO because you're more involved in this than me? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the stakeholder panel was comprised of Nicola Wade, who is our head of commissioning in the OPCC, Nigel Stevenson, who is Chief Finance Officer at Nottinghamshire County Council, and Becky Smethers, who is Chief Finance Officer at Nottinghamshire Police Fire and Rescue Service. Apologies. And the questions were broadly around partnership working, and again, in relation to police, financial governance and management as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If I can move on to Mr. Bob Vaughan-Newton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Past reports to the panel have noted faults in the financial systems, which meant that some financial information was unreliable. This was raised during the confirmation hearing regarding the interim arrangement, which was to begin work to improve the position. Can you tell us whether the systems are now robust or whether further work is needed? And I'll have another question in a moment.
Really good point. It has been noted about capability and capacity previously, and I've got full confidence in the potential appointee here of dealing with her experience, that she could bring fresh eyes, which I think is what is needed.
Yeah, I thought it was a systems fault, particularly trying to ensure that the payroll information tied up.
Oh, is it okay to pass across to my CEO, please?
So the force have recently completed what they call Operation Regain. They did have a multi-force shared services arrangement which managed payroll, HR, some financial systems as well. And for a period of approximately 3 years, it had been noted that it wasn't delivering very capably. There were system errors. However, I am happy to say that following quite an extensive piece of work, the force has brought those services back in-house and manages them directly, and that they have also procured 2 new IT systems, one for HR management and one for financial management. So far, so good. I believe police officers were paid in the middle of the month, so fingers crossed it continues to work as well.
Referring to page 16 of the pack, which is the organisational chart for the OPCC, this is documentation to do with the appointment of a chief finance officer. I have to say, having looked quite carefully at that chart, I cannot see where the chief finance officer falls on it. Where's Wally?
Thank you. We noticed this yesterday, actually, didn't we? And hands up, I hadn't spotted it before. The new CFO has no line management responsibilities and reports directly to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
So can I just check, Commissioner, or through your Chief Executive, you will update this to show the one line through to the Commissioner?
I'm not on there either. Yeah.
I thought you were. It says Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioner at the top.
Oh, are they here? See, I've got CEO.
No, you're at the top, you see, the big box.
Oh no, that's actually well, I wish it was, but that's just the header of the paper. Yeah. No. They should be me, and they should be to my side, my CFO and my CEO. Thank you.
It's working. Yeah. Sorry, sir, I just want to offer a mea culpa. That's entirely my fault. And it will be rectified, and I will share around the organogram. There was no intention to leave either Caroline or the Chief Finance Officer off. They are required, obviously, by law to be within the structure of an OPCC. We didn't, as Caroline said, actually notice until yesterday, incredibly.
To be honest, I just thought you had done it just to test that the panel was reading the papers properly.
We're not that cunning, honestly.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those answers. Can I move to Councillor Inglis, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Just a quick question, really. What do you see as the priorities for the CFO in the first few months?
Actually, there's loads, but value for money. Everything we do is spending public money, and I want to be absolutely sure every penny is spent wisely. I do really like the idea of the priority budgeting. One of the outstanding ideas during the interview, and also when Gillian first starts, there will be a period of handover with the existing. So we've got to get that smooth, but value for money is my priority that I want my CFO to be looking at, and efficiencies and effectiveness.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Inglis?
No, I don't think so. I think that answers quite well to whether you're setting any new priorities or anything that's different from before.
Well, we are changing how we do accountability with the more governance with the chief constable, and I see my CFO as being really helpful to make sure I can ask all the right questions. I'm very clear. I'm not a financial expert, so I will really be coveting her opinion, and the expertise she's got of working in a police before will be really helpful.
Thank you, thank you. You'll be pleased to know, Commissioner, that we've got one final question for you before moving on to the candidate. Mrs Harding, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. I think the panel would like to know how Mark Kimberley operated up till now in terms of time, the arrangements that were made at this point, and then on to the handover, how that's going to operate. And then looking at the information you provided to us, it appears that Mrs Holder will be working, is it 3 to 4 days? Is it a part-time arrangement? And again, we'd like to flesh that out a bit more, and if you could explain how that's going to work, bearing in mind that Mark Kimberley is working part-time as well for you. We don't know the arrangement and the timescales involved in both cases. So I'd be grateful if you could explain that to us. Also, you mentioned that Mrs Holder can't start till July, so we'd like to know how that's going to operate too.
Yeah, yes, we've been trying to get Mrs Holder quicker, but she does have no notice to work, and even though she already works for a police force, we've still got to go through the full vetting process because it's such a senior appointment. I'd just like to assure you that we've had conversations with the Chief Constable. We'd already, I think we'd agreed that until we get the new CFO in post, we can still carry on borrowing Mark when needed. Mark originally was working 4 days a week for the police force. I think he's been working about half his time for us. He started working 5 days a week, plus some of his work has been backfilled by Danny and other people in his team in the police force. That will continue to happen as long as it needs to. There is, once we get our ship settled, there is an opportunity for our new CFO to be working 3 days a week, but I think we're going to need more days than that to start with because we've got a lot of work to do. And the handover is part of that process.
Would you be able to give us an update at our June meeting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you'll be. We'll know what the starting date is at the June meeting. The transition will come in.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs Harding. Just listening to the dialogue there, it's really a question of. I think you asked really around contingency arrangements. Coming back to your point of the start date, and I'm not sure that I've quite grasped what your contingency plan might be. Just amplify it slightly, thank you.
Thank you. We have an agreement with the Chief Constable that we can keep Mark as long as we need to. That's all been agreed. It's all in writing. But we're keen to get our new dedicated CFO as quick as possible. Thank you.
And just to provide assurance, we developed a joint Chief Finance Officer protocol, which I think we spoke about at Mr Kimberley's confirmation hearing. So that remains intact, and we have received formal notification from Chief Constable Guildford that he's happy for that arrangement to continue until such a time as we get Gillian, we are able to start Gillian into her role.
I'm sorry to press home on this point, forgive me, and trying to write notes as well as listen. I think, Commissioner, I heard you say that when Mark moved over from working with the police to pick up your needs, eventually he was working 5 days, and it was roughly split 50-50, so he was doing roughly 2.5 days for yourself. Yes. So I suppose we're just trying to understand the rationale of just how many days you think you might want for this role to be filled. If I accept that Mark's very experienced and been doing it a long time, so can obviously do things very rapidly probably, and I don't mean that in any rude way to your incoming candidate, but I'm just trying, I think, to seek some assurance of how you're going to plan for the hours that you need. It seems just a little fluid and not quite clear at the moment. Forgive me for that if I've just not understood everything.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear. Gillian is starting full-time, working with us, but we will be looking, once it's steadied down, to you're keen to have better work-life balance and to work less hours, and that is possible for this job.
Thank you. I think we've got to that. So we're starting out full-time employment. Over time, you'll review with your Chief Executive and Gillian, obviously, as the potential candidate, what's achievable and in what time frame. So perhaps what we need to add into any report in the future, given, I guess, 3 to 6 months in terms of settling in and understanding then what the demands of the role are, will give us a better understanding. Is that, are members content with that as a way forward? That seems to be, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're let off for a moment now, Commissioner, and we turn to welcome your candidate, Gillian. Gillian, I'm sorry, we've tried to put you into the best seat where you can see and everyone can see you. It does mean I'm going to be sort of turning around to look at you. I'm not ignoring you at all, but every now and again, if I've missed sort of looking at you, I'll be peering over like this. Can we welcome you, Gillian? We have a number of questions that have been sent to you, and I think you've had a chance to look at this. So if I can ask Councillor Ellis to perhaps kick off the proceedings. It's over there.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mrs. Holder. Must be a rather strange experience sitting up there being talked about. But this is your opportunity to have your say. We've seen your CV, and we'd like you to flesh that out a little bit and tell us how your previous experience prepares you for the Chief Finance Officer role, and then go on to particularly how you'll meet the Commissioner's priorities over the first 6 months.
Morning, thank you very much. So I've spent the last 20 years working in public sector and political environment at Lincolnshire County Council, and for the last 7 years at the Police and Crime Commissioner for Lincolnshire. I've worked my way up to Deputy CFO, gaining knowledge and experience as I've progressed. In particular for the CFO role, I have experience of setting the annual budget, the medium-term financial plan, doing the precept, as well as ensuring that financial statements are produced on time and up to the required standard. I have experience of Home Office and MOJ specific grant regimes and what is required to sign those claims off, as well as ensuring that grant agreements with third-party organisations for the delivery of some of the specific elements. This experience means I can step into this role on day one and know what's required to deliver these specific aspects. I'll need to lead on the development of the financial strategy and the supporting strategies to facilitate the delivery of the Make Not Safe plan. Again, this is an area I've had much experience of in the last 7 years particularly, either drafting or reviewing such financial strategies. I'm very clear on the CFO's remit to ensure value for money for the taxpayer, and I would ensure that the route to allocating funds and budget was robust and including the requirement for business case or rationale for why additional budget was being allocated. I'm very conscious that there's a finite amount of money, and so it has to be put to best use in all circumstances. I have experience of setting budgets in situations where funds are reduced but demand is increasing. This involves reviewing the funding allocation process to ensure that there's some form of prioritisation, to ensure that funds are being allocated appropriately. Also working with budget holders to identify savings that can contribute to overall targets. I recognise the value of periodic service reviews to ensure we're not just doing what we've always done, but factoring in any changes, so any more recent best practice, any new collaborations or partnership working that we can explore. I've gained a lot of experience in the way in which the PCC holds the Chief Constable to account. I would bring that knowledge to bear in this role. I'll be keen to understand how it's performed currently and perhaps suggest ways it could be done differently. For example, I would expect to see some kind of resources governance meeting where against the plans for people, ICT, fleet, estates and finance could be monitored, where the PCC would have an opportunity to question the reports provided by the Chief Constable and specific subject matter experts. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on anything, Councillor Ellis?
I suppose just the question about the first 6 months. What do you see as your priorities for the first 6 months?
Obviously, given the timings, there's going to be budget setting in that, which is going to be new to me in a different police and crime commissioner organisation. So I know the steps that need to be taken, but I'm going to have to just find my feet a bit as to what exists already and how it's been done before to kind of merge those two expectations together, I suppose. But obviously the priority-based budget review, whilst it can't be done in the next 6 months, I think it's obviously a key part of the future going forward. So certainly start some thinking and discussions about how we might do that and the timing of that so we can plan appropriately for it, because it may well be that in setting the budget we factor in some of the expectations of what we want to come out of that priority-based budgeting in terms of perhaps different levels of budget in different areas. So.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Leslie Doll, please.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mrs Holder. This is a two-part question. You've covered some of it already, but perhaps to drill down a little bit further. So from your experience, what are the key processes that you're going to put in place, the key processes that organisations need to ensure robust financial plans and systems are in place? And also, have you got any examples of good practice that you want to introduce? I know you've touched on some of this already, when you implement the financial management of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. So CFOs need to ensure that there's a detailed budget setting timetable. That gives adequate time for proper budget holder engagement, time for finance to properly cost those requirements. There needs to be time built in for the Chief Constable to review the budget proposals that he's putting forward to the Commissioner, and time for public consultation on the precept and the budget proposals. Where assumptions are included, it's vital that the impact of any change is quantified and examined and understood by the senior management teams, because if the consequences can then be planned for should they materialise. For example, pay awards. You're nearly always assuming a pay award when you set the budget. It can sometimes be very different when they actually happen in the following year. The budget needs to be built up and recorded on the financial system in such a way to identify the components of how it's made up, so cost pressures, savings, inflation. This helps for when you're later looking back at your budget setup and perhaps for scrutiny and assurance from third parties. There should be a medium-term financial plan to demonstrate sustainable finances, a balanced annual budget, and a monitoring process that enables that to be delivered. There must be a scheme of delegation to individual roles and finance contract and procurement regulations in place to protect public money and also protect individuals from acting beyond their authority. Making provision to access specialist advice where necessary is also really important for things like treasury management, tax, legal. Ensuring policies are kept up to date and any systems that rely on those policies keep pace with any changes that are made. And having appropriate risk management regime in place, reported to responsible senior officers and also to the audit committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If I could ask Councillor Inglis, please.
Thank you. I think you've probably covered a lot of this, what I'm going to ask you, but what do you see as the biggest challenge to you in the first, let's say the first year?
Thank you. I might not have covered it actually. Ultimately, I think the biggest challenge will be having the responsibility of the Section 151 role. I've always had people above me with that ultimate responsibility. So this will be a challenge for me personally in not having that protection almost. I welcome the opportunity to be pushed beyond my comfort zone and I feel like I'm ready for that challenge. In addition, the move to a different county means that the network of contacts that I have, really well established, will be less useful. I'll need to form all those new connections again, build those relationships that I currently have already, and I'll need to do this to properly fulfil the CFO role. That's in order that all the public sector bodies are working together to deliver the best outcomes for Nottinghamshire.
So just come back to that. So on a personal basis then, what's your challenges personally? Are you needing to relocate, you travel, your work-life balance? You know, if you're looking to relocate, obviously, you know, new job, moving house is perhaps the two most stressful things a person can go through in life.
That's very true. I'm not planning to move house at the moment. The journey is about an hour commute. I'm kind of in my mind thinking that I'll maybe do a bit of a mixed economy. I'll travel some days. I might choose to stay overnight, a night a week, maybe 2 nights a week, just depending on how the week is looking, just to try and relieve that long day. And the commute's wonderful when it's all moving smoothly, but it's not so great when the A46 gets closed and things like that, so I have to be real about it. So yeah, I'm prepared for I recognise that these opportunities don't come up very often. I've been looking for a little while, thinking it's about time I push myself up to a CFO role. And an hour commute to me seems doable in order to get that career advancement that I've been looking for. So yeah, it'll be an adjustment, but I'm prepared for it.
So will there be facilities to work from home?
Thank you, Councillor Inglis. So all of our staff are enabled to work on a hybrid basis. We had to adopt that, obviously, during pandemic era, and we've actually found it works very well for all members of staff, and that will be extended to Gillian as well.
Thank you. We've done all your questions, Councillor Inglis, or thank you. If I could ask you a question, Gillian, so I'm going to lean forward so I can see you. In my experience of, not just in this role, but other roles, I've found chief finance officers broaden their brief from finance, if I can start by saying that, and want to get involved in all sorts of the strategic things that have obviously financial implications. So my question to you is, what do you see as your role in the budget setting process, sort of end to end, and the delivery of the Commissioner's Police and Crime Panel? And how would you share some of that and support that for the panel to understand particularly at the budget setting process.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on your initial observation, it is very much the way of the world in that it's quite right that the finance person at any sort of senior level, public sector or private sector, is actually a lot more involved in a lot more things than just the number crunching. So that is definitely the way the world is moving, and I think that's a good thing because we're certainly able to do a bit more than just crunch numbers, so it's quite nice to be involved in a bit of a wider remit. In terms of my role as I see it in budget setting, my role is to oversee the budget setting process to achieve the precept and budget decisions signed off by the Commissioner, ultimately, in accordance with those statutory deadlines. The CFO also has a statutory duty to report on the robustness of the budget and the adequacy of the reserves. I play a key role in budget setting as the Deputy CFO currently. I set out the strategic level timeline that takes the senior management teams through the milestones of the budget setting process, including public consultation, budget holder and partner engagement, grant and tax-based notifications, the police and crime panel presentation, PCC decisions and communications to billing authorities. I've drafted papers along this path and presented them to senior management teams on the progress to date and any changes, say in assumptions that we're making along the way. And I then draft the PCC decision on the precept and the budget. So I feel that's a good grounding for the work I will have to be responsible for in this role. The budget must be balanced and have a monitoring schedule to set out to identify budget variations. And currently at Lincolnshire, which is something I'll have to explore how we do it in Nottinghamshire, we do that for revenue on a monthly basis, for capital on a quarterly basis, and we also monitor reserves throughout the year as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I invite Councillor Carlton, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Mrs Holder. Welcome, and thank you for your responses so far. They've been really, really insightful. Would like to look at around sort of stakeholders and relationships. We know in any workplace setting that developing and maintaining those relationships are really strong. So I was just wondering if you could share with the panel this morning who you see as your main stakeholders and how you intend to develop effective relationships with them to meet the objectives of your job role.
Thank you. So I've split it into internal and external stakeholders. So internally, my main stakeholders would be the Commissioner, the Chief Executive, the Head of Commissioning, the Force CFO, and the Force Chief Officer team, and of course the Audit Committee. Externally, my main stakeholders would be the Police and Crime Panel, equivalent roles to myself in partner organisations, the auditors, and government departments. I operate in a way that builds confidence, trust and credibility with all stakeholders. I demonstrate my commitment to deliver to the required standard and deliver on time. I communicate with people and involve them as appropriate. Excuse me. I listen to their perspective and involve them and find a mutually convenient and beneficial outcome, so try to work together. This can be achieved both by attending specific meetings where others are in attendance and engaging in the subject that is being discussed, but also recognising when that one-to-one meeting or conversation might be helpful. That's tended to be how I've worked in the past. It's worked. I've got a really good network in Lincolnshire, so I'm hoping I can use those same attributes to do the same in Nottinghamshire.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Carlton?
I was going to say, I'm sort of interested in sort of those pre-existing relationships that you have in Lincolnshire, and is there any of those that you would see transferring over, inverted commas, to Nottinghamshire to help you in your role?
Absolutely. I'm certainly not going to be breaking any of those links. You know, there's even reference points sometimes, you know, when you're looking at something that you've either not come across before or you know that somebody else has dealt with. You can definitely still go back to that network, if you like, and use them to to help, and I'd do the same for them if they still needed something that I might have knowledge of in my previous role in Lincolnshire. Absolutely. And even with regional collaborations, you know, there's still going to be connections with people that I have connections with now. So yes, I certainly won't be breaking any of those relationships anytime soon.
Thank you very much. That answers your question. Thank you. Mrs. Harding, I think you may have covered this, but do you want to come and ask this particular question?
Yes, may I ask it anyway and see if we can get some more information? Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Holder, and welcome. I think you have covered this point, but I'd just like to know, we meet quarterly as a panel, and we'd like to know how you see your role in relation to the panel. I know you may have covered a bit of that, but if there's anything else you'd like to tell us, we'd be grateful.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Firstly, I'm clear that my role is politically restricted. I see my role as supporting the Commissioner in her responsibility to the Police and Crime Panel. I'd see myself attending the meetings with the Commissioner, preparing papers for the meeting as necessary, and engaging with yourselves as members to learn what would assist in your understanding. For example, we currently do an informal session on the budget and the precept before the formal meeting to give a wider understanding and an opportunity for much more questions in readiness for receiving that precept proposal. So that's pretty much how I would see it working.
Thank you very much. That gives us a bit more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ellis, please. Sorry, I've not...
Thank you. You mentioned earlier on that one of the biggest challenges, remember the biggest challenge, is moving to a Section 151 office and how, in a sense, how exposed you are in that role. And I imagine you've had lots of experience challenging people in authority. And I just wonder, give them advice they don't want to hear. I suppose as Section 151 officer, even telling them there are things they can't do. Could you just tell us how you manage such a situation?
Thank you, yes. I recognise that the role of the CFO can be a very lonely one at times, particularly when you're delivering a message that nobody wants to hear. But it's an aspect that comes with the territory. I'll always gather evidence that supports my challenge. For example, why a proposal doesn't demonstrate good value for money or why it contravenes the financial regulations. Then I'll take the time to meet with the person or the people and explain the rationale for why I'm opposing or giving the bad news that they don't want to hear. Wherever possible, I'll try and propose an alternative or a more appropriate way to achieve the outcome they're looking to achieve. There will be occasions where an alternative or a compromise can't be reached, and I understand that, and I'll simply have to be clear that an action can't take place on the basis as proposed. And obviously I'm aware of the more extreme steps that I can take that are available to me, such as informing the monitoring officer, discussing with external audit, or ultimately issuing a Section 114 report on unlawful expenditure or an imbalanced budget. So I'm really clear on what I have to do and what my role means in that circumstance.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Ellis?
And if push comes to shove, are you comfortable with that?
Absolutely at the time. I won't have a very pleasant drive home, but I'll do what I have to do. I'm very clear what this role means, and I'm clear that I would do what I needed to do. But yeah, I probably wouldn't have a very comfortable evening or even a weekend afterwards because I'd be mulling it over considerably.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Councillor Edwards, Nottingham City Council, apologies for lateness, and I have no interest to declare. I saw in your CV reference to SAP, and I was intrigued. We had that where I used to work at British Rail Computing. I never did it myself, but at British Rail Computing we had cost accounting so that costs were absolutely tracked. Now we're here to talk about not a penny wasted. And yet I've never seen cost accounting used in local government or police authorities. Have you seen it used, and do you think there's a case for it?
I've never seen it successfully used. I've seen many attempts at trying to, and I can definitely understand and appreciate that it's a good thing to have, but it seems notoriously difficult. And I know even in recent years in policing, it's been explored again, and even probably more recently. I think it requires such a lot of investment up front and getting the systems and the information that feeds in to be so correct to make it anything like worthwhile. I think that's why it always falls down. But absolutely, it's a great thing to have if you can achieve it. But I agree, it's been notoriously difficult to achieve in all my 20 years of public sector experience.
And I suppose if you were asked to do it, you do a risk analysis, wouldn't you? To what extent do you see risk analysis as an important tool in your role?
It's absolutely vital. Good decision making needs that element of what's the risk involved brought into it. I'd expect to see that in any sort of business case when it's proposing the options, to have risks set aside each option so that you would know, even if one option looked good on all other fronts, to understand if there was higher risk involved with it in a certain aspect. So it's a key part of any assessment on any financial front, is to understand, for a decision maker to understand what the associated risks are with that decision.
Is one of the challenges with risk analysis not quite knowing when to mention a risk to anybody else? How do you decide when something is worth discussing with others?
I can only speak from experience currently. How it works at the moment is each department and service area has a risk register where they monitor their own risks for their own areas, and largely they're managed within the team. However, if there's one that becomes of concern, it's escalated up to either the Force Risk Register or the PCC's risk register, where it gets a more formal, rigorous review, because there are formal boards that review those higher level risk registers. And then obviously they can be discussed, mitigated, perhaps reduced back down and sent back to the department, or maintained on those higher level risk registers. So I see that's the way it best works in terms of making sure the ones that need raising and escalating are done in that way.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Edwards?
Well, I just think it's one of the sort of interesting challenges. Sometimes people don't decide to raise risks with people because they decide it's not worth reporting, and then when something happens, the conversation gets very vital in a very short period of time. So I heard what your answer was about the formal ways of trying to make sure everything's recorded. But have you had those experiences when something really grew at the last minute and you thought, crikey, and then nobody seems to have known what you've known?
Pandemic, because that wasn't on our risk register, and we've had to deal with that in a completely unique way that we would never have imagined, and we've managed it. So yeah, there are also always going to be things that do crop up, sometimes quite minor, but that one's extremely major, and didn't have any mitigations and preparedness ready for it, other than your sort of business continuity plan that kind of covered some of it, but not all of it. So yeah, but I suppose by having the service having their own little risk register, that keeps it quite, not informal, but it allows teams to just discuss their own things amongst, so it kind of fosters that. Just tell us anything that you're thinking might be a worry, and then we can decide without it going up to that sort of formal level, because then only the really important stuff ends up at that high level.
Thank you. Thank you, Gillian, for handling those off the cuff questions. Thank you for that. We've concluded all of our questions, unless I'm just checking with colleagues. Is there any last burning question people want to ask? No? In that case, is there anything you'd like to ask of the panel at all? It's not compulsory, but it's courteous of me to ask you. Thank you. Commissioner, is there anything you'd like to add before I read out the exclusion notice?
I really hope that you see why I'm recommending the appointment of Gillian Holder as our CFO. Her authenticity and values came across really clearly in the interview, and I hope she shared that with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. The panel will now be invited to... Sorry.
Before we go to the exclusion, could the Commissioner confirm kind of worst case scenario for start date based on vetting and
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, my learned colleague has just asked one question for you, Commissioner, before I read out the notice of exclusion, and that's just to reconfirm the sequence of events in terms of the expectation of the dates. I think that's what worst case scenario if we don't meet those deadlines.
We're aiming for a start date in July, but subject to vetting, it might be August.
And can I just check, I think just to build on that, heaven forbid that things don't always go according to plan. Is it right to assume that you may be able to utilise Mark's services for some time to come yet?
Yeah, we're really hoping it's all going to go according to plan, but we have in writing an agreement from the Chief Constable through to September already.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. That can go. Thank you for that. I'm now on item 4, the exclusion of the press and public. The panel will be invited to exclude the press and public for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that discussions are likely to involve disclosure of exempt information described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in closing it. Could I have a proposer, please, from the floor? Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Seconder, Mrs. Harding. And with that, then vote. Everyone in favour? Sorry, thank you. Thank you very much. If I could then just have a temporary pause while people leave the auditorium. Thank you.